Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm honored to welcome in Admiral Craig Faller. He's the board member over at Pay Cargo and one of the most accomplished guests that we've ever had the pleasure of speaking to. And before we bring him on, I just want to list a few of the career accomplishments. And so just running off of this list, a graduate of U.S. Naval Academy with a bachelor's in system engineering, master's in national security affairs, strategic planning, commanding officer deployed to the Arabian Gulf and participated in maritime interception operations in support of the United Nations sanctions against Iraq, commanding officer who assisted victims of the devastating tsunami off of Indonesia, and senior military assistant to the Secretary of Defense. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of the topic we're going to be discussing today. And that's regarding the logistics and supply chain challenges around the devastating earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria earlier this month. Actually, again, this week, they were hit by another earthquake. And there aren't too many more people that are more qualified to talk about this topic. So, Admiral, welcome into the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And it is an important topic to talk about. People are working around the clock as we speak, saving lives. And it deserves to be discussed and understood and the successes of the relief operations embraced, but also understanding where things could be improved as we move forward.
100%. And before we get into sort of the specifics of Turkey and Syria, can you give us a sense of just the logistical operations in general whenever a disaster like this strikes? You know, after a crisis occurs, is there a normal, quote unquote, normal response, logistically speaking?
Every disaster is unique. The organizations like the United Nations and here in the U.S., USAID, Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, work to try to prepare. The U.S. military involved in exercises and tabletop discussions, looking at where the disasters have occurred in the past and how to best prepare for the future. So getting supplies and people and assessments there rapidly to the point of need is key. And of course, you're coming into an area that's lost all its infrastructure, lost the ability to communicate. Cell phone towers are going to be down. So just the ability to connect people is very, very problematic. Roads will be washed out of or broken in the case of an earthquake, fractured, shattered bridges. And so all these things compound the ability to get in and understand what needs to be done. But a lot of time is being spent by these organizations studying lessons learned of the past. So for the next time and the next time after that, they could be more efficient and faster.
And so when we're talking about establishing just on the ground of what happens, is there a general sense of what you establish within the first 24 hours or the first week compared to maybe a month out? Give us a sense of what the immediate concerns are versus the ongoing concerns.
The immediate concerns will be the rescue and looking for people, trying to rescue people, account for survivors. In this particular example, 3 million people were impacted by the 7.8 magnitude earthquake, and about 1 million people, as of data as early as yesterday, had been impacted in terms of lost homes or damaged homes. So that's an immense amount of people. So getting an accurate accounting of that is key. So the first phase is save lives through a rescue operation. And then the second phase is going to be to rebuild and establish shelter, food, water, medical hygiene things so that there's not a continued loss of life from a disease or cholera, some kind of impacts of not having adequate sanitation. So those kind of the couple phases that you would be looking at. So the disaster relief teams and countries involved are going to come in and establish a coordination center, trying to fuse the information and get to ground truth as to what the teams know and what they don't know. And then moving forward, always with the host nation, in this case, Turkey, would have a very developed organization for this. Turkey's a member of NATO, and they'll work with the host nation in the lead to try to look at what needs to be rebuilt and the long-term efforts to recovery.
So with zeroing in on the situation with Turkey and Syria, what does the logistical landscape look like for them before the disaster? What modes of transportation are they? Is it rail? Is it the big cargo ships? Is it freight trucks? Is it a combination of the three? Give us a sense of what that logistical operation looked like before, and then we can kind of get into the challenges of what they're dealing with now.
Looking at the terrain involved. So I mentioned Turkey, but also have to remind the listeners and everyone that Syria is a big part where this occurred. Northern Syria, western part of Syria. First of all, the terrain is very, very rough. So mountainous terrain, lots of roads, some improved roads, but a lot of roads that you would expect to see in a mountainous region. Turkey, much more developed infrastructure, more modern country. Syria has been really ravaged by a civil war for the past decade plus. So you have a very different set of infrastructure going in. A lot of the local to the point of need transportation is going to be ground. It's going to be trucks. It's going to be the kind of things from small trucks to 5-ton trucks to bigger trucks, some rail, some air cargo, and some by sea. Both countries have seaports. That becomes key for the follow-on relief. All that infrastructure is damaged, destroyed, of an unknown condition initially, and that's a big part of the initial assessment and search and rescue efforts to figure out what's intact and what isn't. We mentioned in the introduction about my involvement in the Indonesia tsunami. So we were the first U.S. responders. I was in command of the U.S. warship Shiloh. We were part of the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group, enjoying Christmas in Hong Kong, and we responded and arrived on scene on 1 January 2005. That was a 9.2 magnitude earthquake. About 200,000 people in Indonesia alone were killed, and the current earthquake, about 7.8 magnitude. Today's death toll was tragically too high at 48,000. Any amount of loss of life is just a travesty. But when we arrived in Indonesia, and at that point, in addition to helping survivors and looking at search and rescue, we were also looking at the infrastructure. And what you just found was almost every bridge within a few miles of the coastline and roads were damaged or destroyed in some way. So we're looking for airfields, places to land helicopters. Looking at soccer stadiums would be a kind of place. And all that improvisation is now going on in Syria and Turkey as folks try to rebuild and then respond and get the logistics flowing to the point of need.
And so, as you had just mentioned, tragically, 48,000 people have perished. There's countless others that have been impacted, loss of homes, loss of family members. And then there's also the actual infrastructure side of things, as you mentioned. So the earthquakes have destroyed roadways. They've caused major power outages and created large scale damage to major ports in the Mediterranean, making it a logistical challenge to get much needed relief to the area. So when an earthquake happens like that, is it the first sort of set of priorities is to address the infrastructure so you can get aid to folks more quickly, or is it the humanitarian efforts, or is it a combination of the two?
Well, certainly you're looking at everything that you mentioned that comes into play to move forward. The first response is going to be to save lives. So that's the search and rescue response, finding where people are trapped under rubble, where they might be trapped in a remote village, they can't communicate. That's the first effort. In order to execute that effort, we've got to access these areas, whether it's in a city or in a mountainside. And so knowing where the roads are intact and where the bridges have to be, have to go through a stream around the bridge, or maybe the only mode of transport will by helicopter or a rotary wing of some type, or some small light air transport. So that's all part of it, because in order to get to all the locations, and the United Nations and Turkish authorities, I'm sure, have a big chart on the wall with all sorts of markings and electronic charts and sharing data to know, have we accessed every house, looked under every rubble. And teams from the U.S., specialized teams, will be flown in with dogs and search and rescue experts. So that's the first priority, is that saving lives. But in order to do that, you've got to really do a rapid assessment of the infrastructure that's involved.
And so when something like that happens, say you're shipping humanitarian goods and you know that those goods need to arrive in those areas, those pockets of need, what kind of, I guess, data collection is going on to find out where those pockets of needs are at? Because I imagine it has to be chaotic. Who is the organizer of the chaos in order to figure out where those pockets of needs are?
A lot. So one thing about a disaster that just brings out the best of people. So a lot of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are going to step up. World Hope is an example of an organization stepping up. These organizations, they step up, they come in and they help. And so somebody has to coordinate all that. So the UN steps up their role as a coordination. USAID, BHA will play a coordinating role. People look to the host nation as the lead coordinator. A lot of effort is spent there, but there can be seams with all those organizations. And so people will work hard to bridge those seams. While the search and rescue is going on, people will be looking to say, does this village have water? Yes, no. How is their shelter? What do they need? For immediate needs, tarps, tents, that kind of thing? Do they have any food stuffs, or do they need that? So there'll be things flowing in for that, and then medical supplies flowing in different nations. Over 50 nations have participated in the current relief efforts thus far. And understanding that logistics flow is so key, because if you need cooking oil and water and maybe rice and some basic substance, but what shows up is a load of used clothing, and that's not what is needed, then that ends up clogging logistics node. We saw in Indonesia at times where cargo was being offloaded, it wasn't what would been needed at that time. And so people are trying to do good. They want to rush supplies. It's really a lot of management effort going into ensuring the right supplies to get right to the right place, and you don't end up clogging those very fragile logistics pathways with things that aren't needed. And I know that effort's occurring, and people are looking hard at that. In 2021, was the lead U.S. military element for a 7.2 earthquake in Haiti. So we think about the one they had in 2010, but in 2021, in August of 2020, big effort there. And that was constantly trying to ensure that we didn't surprise ourselves with what was flowing in, and what needed to get to the people was what was out there. The UN they're pros at this. They have really good staffs that do great work, but the scope of these tragedies means that a lot of hands are needed in order to get things right.
And so when you have sort of that just mass organization that's going on, what about the port infrastructure within Turkey? I saw that there was a fire at one of the ports that raged on for about 5 days, and they're not exactly sure what has caused the fire within all the containers that have been stacked. And luckily they have put out that fire since then. But are the ports usable? Is it I guess still efficient to work through the ports, or do you just kind of back off the ports for a while they theoretically and figuratively put out that fire and then reroute the goods somewhere else?
A lot of the assessments that need to be done to the level of infrastructure, and the ports that you cite, Blythe, are a really good example. Require teamwork. So there's so much that needs to be done. It's just not one agency or entity that can do it. So in a disaster like this, often the civilian agencies, which are always lead, will rely on military expertise, whether it's from NATO countries, the U.S., or other nations, to come in with assessment teams. So the U.S. military in particular has port assessment teams that they are trained to come in. They'll look at the bottom topography to make sure there's no change to the charted depth, which would be a danger to any cargo ships coming in. They look at the integrity of the piers, the integrity of the mooring cleats and the bollards on the piers. Do the piers have the cargo handling intact? Yes or no? Will the ships need to bring that in? All those things are looked at. And then after that's done, and we check out that this port A, port B, another port is certified good, then that information is then passed off to the coordination centers so that we can begin to schedule cargo ships and freight to come into those seaports. So that effort's ongoing in this particular case. Back to my experience in Haiti, we had the same experience in 2021. We had to get relief supplies, so roads going out onto the peninsula. They call it the southern claw of Haiti. Very bad. And of course, there's rain, the magnitude, the earthquake created slides. And so bringing things in by sea became critical, but we weren't sure whether some of these piers had the integrity needed. So we had to send teams in there and do a quick check to ensure that they were sufficient and safe for handling of all the equipment. It's just so key. So there's a real big safety aspect to this.
When I was working at a 3PL years ago, we were the exclusive contract provider for the American Red Cross for all of their water loads. And so when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, I mean, this was a while ago, but we were responsible for all of those water loads. And it was very much an organizational effort between the private sector and the American Red Cross and a lot of the federal aid. And so it kind of sounds like a lot of that infrastructure exists, or that, I guess, communication exists over in Turkey. Is it safe to say that maybe a lot of that doesn't exist in Syria?
I think Syria and Turkey are different situations based on the political leadership and the state of development of the country. To be fair, the epicenter was in Turkey, so there's been more impacted people. The numbers of about 350,000 displaced are out of their homes in Syria versus 1 million in Turkey. But there are more challenges in Syria due to the political situation and the ongoing civil war.
And so there was another video that I was watching, and speaking of Haiti, and it was a company called Windover Productions, which does a great logistics series, and it was talking about the logistics of disaster relief. And they say the reality is that often, but not always, the more accessible a disaster site is, the more response it gets. And so because Haiti is relatively close to the U.S., it was very easy, or easier, versus other situations where we could get that aid to Haiti more quickly. Is that a safe assumption for Turkey as well, where we have operations and landing points for, to get that humanitarian aid to Turkey more quickly?
I think it is a fact, the accessibility and how adjacent is a country or tied into their neighbors makes a big impact. And looking at the case of Turkey, while that area is quite remote and very removed in the far reaches of the Mediterranean, Turkey's a NATO member. There are a lot of capable countries that have very well developed humanitarian assistance, disaster relief organizations and teams that have come to bear and are in the neighborhood in proximity. And compare and contrast that to Indonesia or the Indian Ocean, where vast distances between the different countries makes problematic. One, the assessment, just knowing how bad it is delay in days, not hours, and then getting supplies there takes days and weeks. It was a 4-day sail for us from Hong Kong to Indonesia. It's just immense, the distances of the Asia Pacific region. So I think the remoteness of the location, and the country, and then the country's integration into other regional organizations or international organizations does play in.
What about, I guess, the role of customs when it comes to these, emergency shipments? Is it still sort of the same rules that apply, or are they kind of, eased up a little bit in order to expedite these shipments?
Well, it is. You asked some really great questions. In a disaster, people tend to come together and more rapidly overcome the bureaucratic hurdles that are just so irritating in day-to-day life. I like to refer to things as blocking your own field goals, and things that could take weeks and months to get done in a disaster get done. But you do point at some of the really larger challenges in the logistics business. So I love the name of your podcast, that everything is logistics. In the military, in the 38-year career, we would say over and over again, logistics is for professionals, because it underpins everything we do. And as I transitioned from 38 years in military service and love the Navy, love the military, is awesome, and looking for opportunities in the private sector to make a difference and translate some of my skills, I was astounded at some of the level of backwardness of the logistics systems and processes that are out there. So still a lot of paper, a lot of faxes, a lot of scan in PDF files, a lot of wire transfers. It's so many disparate ways of doing things. Very hard to get asset visibility and accuracy of data. Now, in the midst of a response to a disaster, people were overcoming all those hurdles, but they do compound the challenges of the response and knowing where goods and services need to flow and go. And I think it underscores the urgency with which a lot of these challenges need to be streamlined, including the customs processes, which is where the question began.
And so, and actually, that brings up, it's a good segue into my next question, because being a board member over at Pay Cargo, which is a global digital all-in-one payment platform for freight and cargo and the logistics industry, it was mentioned that outdated practices in supply chain are fueling the backlog in Turkey and Syria. For a regular civilian like myself, what's going on in the payment side of things that is, contributing or maybe inhibiting the disaster relief efforts over in Turkey and Syria?
So a large percentage of global payments that and I'll specifically focus on air and sea freight cargo, still occur by wire transfer or checks or some mode of payment that most families here in the United States don't even use for their family budget anymore, or maybe they just have one or two pieces of their budget. You kind of flip that around on the global scale. So that leads to delays in payment processing, a lack of transfer of data. Now, in the case of a disaster, most people, organizations come into this saying, look, we're going to respond and then we're going to worry about getting paid. But they still at some point have to get paid. And so reconciling that and overcoming that will be challenges. And then the efficiency of that process, the speed, it just takes too long. And that's what, as I was looking for opportunity to make a difference in a sector that's so important in the logistics sector, this opportunity to be an advisor on the advisory board of Pay Cargo came along. It just seemed that Pay Cargo is exactly the type of high-speed, high-tech, innovative company that's leading the way, cutting edge to modernize and transform systems and processes in the logistics region, an area that will speed things up and allow for more application of the data, more efficiency. People get paid on time, and goods move faster.
And I would imagine that is probably one of the more inefficient parts of logistics, is the lack of getting paid and the lack of data. Is that a safe assumption?
It's really very good safe assumption. So many cases you can't get the cargo released till the payment happens, and the payment takes days, weeks, not hours. Pay Cargo offers a solution that takes it's an instantaneous solution. The way they've applied the technology in the payment system.
And now you kind of mentioned, everything is a little bit, outdated, or a lot of companies are a little outdated, still using fax machines, for God's sakes. And, a lot of the transactions, bills of ladings and payments, anything that in that regard. But on the data side of things, what does sort of the data collection process look like in Turkey right now, or in Syria right now? I would imagine that it's very challenging to get the information on what goods are there, what goods are in need. Tell us a little bit about the data flow of what's going in addition to the shipment flow.
Well, I do know this, that talented people, hardworking people are working day and night to try to make sure there are no seams and everybody has visibility, and the data is exchanged between the UN and the USAID, BHA, Turkish. So that's happening. I'll just relate it to my experience in Haiti in 2021. So it's very recent. We had set up a U.S. military coordination center, and it was about 100 yards from the UN coordination center. And is about a half a mile to the USAID BHA coordination center. We had to physically shuttle people back and forth between those coordination centers in order to ensure an accurate exchange of data. Now, sure, we can send emails back and forth, but in terms of having a system where our data was entered that interacted seamlessly with another system and database so that you didn't have to repopulate something, add the numbers back up, that didn't exist. This is 2021. This is in Haiti, which is right here in our neighborhood of the Western Hemisphere, and the UN, who we know and work with, and the USAID, who is our U.S. partner. We haven't evolved those systems to seamlessly share data. So compound that to a multinational crisis, Syria and Turkey, lots of seams in data. People working real hard to shore that up, but it does point to the greater need to modernize the logistics systems and processes and be able to share data more readily and across company, agency, organization, or country boundaries.
And so after, I say after because they're still experiencing this. They just had another earthquake. I think it was 7.5 that hit Turkey yesterday. And so obviously the aftershocks are still in full effect. But what happens next? Like, how do you go from a disaster response to an ongoing response? What does, I guess, a quote unquote exit plan look like?
Thanks for mentioning the ongoing aftershocks. So they when I saw that yesterday, they had the aftershock. I went and looked how many they've had. They've had 2,100 aftershocks. So I think the initial one was in the neighborhood of 7.8. Yesterday's was about 6.4. And it's horrifying to be on the ground and then continuously feel this. I felt it in Haiti. I felt it in Indonesia. And oh my goodness, this is going to be another one. Here it comes again. And it just causes a wave of anxiety and panic in the people, in the population, which is not what they need. They need stability and looking forward. And that's what the relief organizations will try to do. They'll try to set in place longer-term rebuilding plans. Saw yesterday the U.S. pledged, or recently this week, the U.S. pledged some more rebuilding money for the kind of development, rebuilding the homes and infrastructure that needs to happen. International community will do that. It is a concern, though, because while if you're the military and you're in support of civilian organizations with the unique capabilities the military brings, heavy lift, transport, you don't want to remain there for longer than you needed. You don't want to develop dependencies. And you have to help people get back up on their own feet and begin to care and take care of themselves. But if you leave too soon and those plans aren't in place and the funds don't get to the right people, then it becomes problematic. We responded in 2020, in November 2020, to 2 back-to-back major hurricanes in Central America. It was unprecedented. Outside the hurricane season, both Category 4 hurricanes followed the same track. And that was one of the questions we kept asking. Okay, we're there. We had a number of helicopters that were forward stationed for exercise and training in Honduras. We're all in helping save lives. We're helping assess long-term needs. But okay, we come off the stage. Who's going to help the people of Honduras with the long-term bridges? And that's where the UN and other organizations do come into play. But often there are gaps. And you do hear about it years later. Hey, we never quite fully recovered in this country or that country, and we needed help, and the focus moved on to the next crisis. So I know a lot of people are thinking about that, but it is a concern, particularly if you're in Syria or Turkey.
And probably no real right answer for any one of these locations on when to exit and when that I guess is appropriate to make, or estimation is appropriate to make. Now, as we learn more about these disasters and we respond to them, I imagine that we get a little bit better at responding to them after each time. What do you think will be some of the lessons that we'll come away with? Or is it still too early to tell from the Turkey and Syria situation?
I think it's too early to tell in this particular situation. Folks focused on the immediate needs of the day and building that long-term rebuilding plan that's going to be essential for the future. So people have hope. They need to see that progress. But I know that my own experience in Haiti and Central America, from the day the disaster struck, we have folks assigned to do lessons learned. What worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently? So does USAID, Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs. They really focus on that. And then we collate those lessons learned and we try to roll them into a training program, maybe you through tabletop exercises, seminars, discussions. So we do a lot of work in that area so that next time we're more prepared, better, and not caught unaware, not ready. So things are pre-staged, ready to go.
From a civilian aspect, and I'm not sure if you have the answer to this question, but I was just thinking of, well, what could, a regular person like me, or maybe a regular person that's listening to this episode, if they could offer any kind of help? Is it, charitable donations? Is it volunteering time? What would you recommend to folks who see something like this and want to help, but don't know where to go?
The UN website has there's a place to go for donations. I would start there. I would look at some of the really good non-government organizations. World Hope is one I've mentioned previously that do work in this. The International Red Cross. I think that a financial donation can then be directed by the professionals that are out there that best know where the resources need to go. And then, if you do have the time, volunteering with one of these organizations that focuses on disaster relief is important.
And then, just last couple questions. Is there anything else that, I should have asked but wasn't smart enough to, and that you think is important to highlight on?
No, your questions are great. You're very smart on this, and you asked all the right questions. I look back on 38 years in the military, and I mentioned I love the Navy, I love the military. You better, if you stay that long, you better love what you do. And I really did, and it was the mission, it was the people. We think of the military, we think of that hard power, bombs, bullets, ships, tanks, and fist. Well, the U.S. military, we can bring it. And that the goal of all that hard power is to deter wars. But I was really inspired by the other side, the handshake. The term often uses soft power, but I think of it as a handshake, an outstretched hand, where the U.S. military, in support of an international disaster like what I saw in Indonesia for the big, huge tsunami and aftermath, and in Haiti, most recently in 2021, and in Central America in 2020, comes in and offers the side of people, the loving side, the outstretched hand, the hope, the assistance in a natural disaster. And that's really one of the things that inspired me across my entire career. And that's one I really find excited about being involved with Pay Cargo. That's a company that is innovative. It's startup. They're making a difference. They are really working hard to modernize and innovate in the cargo arena so that companies can benefit from more efficiency, the value of the data transfer, and the record keeping and faster payments. It's been exciting.
Well said. And I think that in times of despair, looking for the helpers is usually where you'll find the most hope. And so I appreciate you sharing your perspective, and especially where Pay Cargo is trying to help in that regard, of helping these containers and this cargo get loosened up much more quickly so it can get in the hands of the people who need it the most. So, Admiral, where can folks follow more of your work, Pay Cargo, all that good stuff?
Right. Well, it'd probably be hard to follow me since I'm a bit challenged. I love communicating and connecting, but it's really hard to follow me. But Pay Cargo, there's a great website, just PAY, capital CARG, one word, and they do a super job updating it. And and keeping people informed about what they offer, what they're innovating, and how they're moving things forward. So that's a great place to go.
Absolutely. And we will link to Pay Cargo in the show notes just to make it easy for everyone. But Admiral, appreciate your time and especially your experience and obviously all of the service that you've given not only to the United States, but to the rest of the world. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation today. It's been a lot of fun and very, very important topic. Logistics
Absolutely.
is for professionals.
Absolutely, because everything is logistics, not to plug the podcast name, but that's what we're talking about.